Evening, everyone. ESBR Boxing back for another preview, another deep dive, as it were. And you're joining me here with two lads who really are the future of boxing media, to talk about two fighters who equally, whoever wins, could also become the future of boxing. Danny and Owen, before I go into what fight that is, just like to check in with you both now and ask how you both doing. You both well?
Can't complain, mate.
Owen, how you
All
doing,
good.
pal?
All good. Yeah,
Good,
buzzing
good.
to.
The fight we are talking about here tonight is one which is gripping audiences, however way you want to, whether you think that's a positive thing or a negative thing. But it's the fight that's taking place on the 26th of Feb over in Saudi Arabia, and that is Jake Paul against Tommy Fury. Which, to be fair, like I said, irrespective of your thoughts on either man or either opponent, is set to be one hell of a spectacle, and it will draw in audiences. So here we are to break it down. Now, first and foremost, I'm going to come to you a couple of questions, and then we will have kind of free-flowing conversation around it. So the first question, without wishing for either of you to give away your prediction on who you think is going to win the fight, I just want to ask you what sort of style of fight do you expect to see here? Obviously, there's a lot of pressure on, I'd say, Tommy Fury. Jake Paul, they're quite mouthy. There's been a lot of promises made, etc., etc. But you expecting a cagey fight? You expecting a stoppage? Just give us a little, 30 seconds to a minute on the sort of styles and how you expect the fight to play out. And I'm going to come to you, Danny, first.
High IQ chess match. No, mate. Like, these are two novices. I've seen people saying that this is probably the equivalent of like an area level title fight. And even I think that's sort of a disservice to area level fighters, to be honest. I think this is a step or two below that. I think it'll probably be really scrappy. If you ever watched Tommy Fury's fight against Jordan Grant, it was just like a lot of falling into each other, smothering a lot of work, and not a whole lot landing clean. So I think that's probably going to consist of the majority of what you see on Saturday night, which is to be expected when sort of two fighters at that level. As the rounds go on, we'll see who's got the better cardio, conditioning, can take a shot better, and stuff like that will probably start to play more of a role, but not expecting a great display of skill, to be honest.
Owen, I come to you, sir. Do you agree with Danny's summary there, or do you see something different potentially unfolding on the
I
20th?
think he's bang on with everything he said there. I think there's a lot of talk. Well, an attempt at trash talking, we'll call it. Um, Jake Paul's obviously a loudmouth, but he's got decent fundamentals. He can throw a straight. He can throw a jab. He can throw the odd hook at pads. Fury, obviously, you see him in training with Big John. He's brilliant on the pads himself, but when you actually fighting something that's moving and coming back at you, it's a completely different ball game. I think it's only an 8 round fight, so it's hard because I think it's going to be cagey at the start. So we're potentially only going to be looking at 3 rounds of action, loosely saying action there. I don't know. For all we know, Jake Paul could. It wouldn't surprise me if he comes out swinging, because Tommy Fury may fold with that. It could be the opposite way. Tommy Fury could come out swinging and Jake Paul will fold. But I think the first round could genuinely see like a record of the lowest amount of punches landed in a professional boxing match. It's I just can't predict how they're going to come out, but I think the first couple of rounds are going to be so cagey. It's going to be mental. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be the most entertaining fight, but it'll be entertaining in a sense, because they are both novice level, really.
No, I agree. Well, let me give you, like, guys. As you both guys said there that you're kind of expecting to be scrappy, but I'll just go for viewers mainly. I'll just go through a quick sort of tear of the tape, really. Tommy Fury 8-0 with 4 KOs. 23 years old, 6 foot in height. Jake Paul 6-0 with 4 KOs, 6'1", 26, so slightly older. But Jake Paul's record, obviously, of those 6 fights is for, I suppose it's fair to say, the majority of guys have been kind of crossover MMA guys or from other sports. You've got Nate Robertson on there, Ben Askren, Tyrone Woodley, Anderson Silva. Tommy Fury, you've got, his last fight was against Daniel Bokiansky. 6 round fight there. Thank you, Danny, for nodding an approval. But he's obviously fought, other guys that have had, I think it's fair to say, kind of journeyman records as well. So the question I'm going to ask really is, And it's a sort of kind of a yes or no one, really. I'll start with you, Owen. Which really, this fight for each fighter, is this the opponent that they're facing the best opponent that they've faced to date? Owen, would you say that's fair to say, yes or no?
Yeah, I'd say it's fair to say. If you look at it from either aspect, although they are journeymen and they're sort of, I don't want to be too disrespectful to journeymen because they're so key to the sport, and there's certain journeymen in this country that are unbelievable. There's certain journeymen in this country that if they get stopped, it's a major statement. But the journeyman Tommy Fury's fought sort of very, very early entry level. Whereas Jake Paul hasn't fought a professional boxer. The best fighter he's faced is Anderson Silva, who's about 49 or something ridiculous like that. So I think when you weigh it up, it's the first actual boxer Jake Paul's fought, and it's the first person that's actually going to try and punch Tommy Fury that he's fought. So definitely, I think probably the toughest fight to date. It's hard to say whether it will actually be the best fighter they've fought, but it's 100% their toughest test for either of them. From those aspects that I've mentioned, but yeah, I think Jake Paul can actually, if he wins, he can say he's beat a pro boxer. Tommy Fury wins, then he gets bragging rights of shutting Jake Paul up. So I do think it's the toughest fight to date for them both. Yeah.
Danny, the same question to you, but also if you'd like to just give us a little summary on who you also think has the better CV, even though it's quite sparse for both men, who you think's actually had the better boxing experience to date as well, please.
It's a tough question. I would agree, first of all, excuse me, with sort of everything that Owen said there as well. It's definitely the fighter each is going to have been in with the most ambition, and then you factor in the age of who Jake Paul's been fighting as well. So obviously Tommy Fury, I think he's actually younger than Jake Paul, so he's going to be fully fresh, fit. In terms of your question, like, it's difficult because Tommy Fury has fought, as Owen says, like the lowest level journeyman in the sport, bar that sort of Jordan Grant fighters like 2 or 3-0, could end up becoming a journeyman himself, no disrespect. So it's tricky because on paper, the Anderson Silva one's probably the best form of the lot. Beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. And that was only like a year and a half, maybe a year before he faced Jake Paul. So that's probably on its own better than anything in Tommy Fury's record. But Ben Askren wouldn't even be fit enough to be he couldn't be a journeyman boxer. His skills are that bad, if you know what I mean. Woodley's a decent fighter, good decent striking. I think that's not a bad win. But the question I always come back to with these like Jake Paul fights is how much ambition are they in there with realistically? Do they sort of know the script and stick to the script and not making any accusations? Don't want to get ESPR sued for libel, but you have to sort of take based on what you're watching. But no, definitely on paper, in theory, it should be the toughest fight of each man's career to date.
Thank you for that, Danny. No, I'd agree with a lot of what both you guys are saying there, actually. Well, now what we're going to do is, obviously, this is a deep dive into this fight. We're going to kind of pick out just each man here and kind of give I suppose, a bit of a what's next, win or lose. So obviously, Tommy Fury, we'll take Tommy Fury first. Obviously comes, from a proud boxing family, I think, who are obviously in the mainstream boxing media frequently. A lot of pressure on himself. He equally has a kind of media career and a sort of TV personality career outside of boxing. A lot of people I know who aren't necessarily boxing fans know who Tommy Fury is. Tommy Fury loses this fight, let's say, in any fashion at all. Well, I mean, what do you see the future looking like for him, Danny? And I'm going to come to you first. Really, you can take that question from a sort of boxing perspective, or you can even take it from a kind of life perspective. But if were Tommy Fury to lose against Jake Paul, is that do you think that being it essentially for boxing, him and boxing? And also, what do you think the reaction will be like?
It would definitely be it for him in terms of like traditional boxing. Could see him probably going down the misfits route and sort of making a name for himself in that world, and would probably make more money than he would, pursuing traditional boxing fights. He might do that anyway, to be honest, even if he wins, because it's a lot more lucrative and probably a lot more appealing than trying to get a fight with the likes of Dan Aziz or whoever else at light heavyweight. So that's if he wins. In terms of like a general thing, I've said in one of our videos, like, I would worry for him if he loses, like walking down the street, like shamed, abused. It would be bad. It would be bad. and he would have to hand over. I'm not sure what he does with his social medias anyway. He would have to hand over all control of his social media to someone else. Like, it wouldn't be nice reading what he would get. I don't know if you asked me about Jake Paul, but in terms of Jake Paul, I don't think he's ever gonna like really look to. He might get like some WBC trinket or something, but he's not interested in like climbing the rankings and, you know, establishing a resume of legitimate fighters. I think there's already talks in place for him to like fight Nate Diaz potentially, and then obviously there's that big money fight for KSI. But to be honest, I don't see either sort of pursuing like a traditional boxing path, and I don't blame them for it. Like, there's far more money in the circus fights, to call them what they are, than, you know, building a traditional professional CV.
Oh, would you agree with Danny there? I mean, if you'd like to just give us your thoughts equally on win or lose for both men. Danny obviously saying, you know, that Tommy Fury would have to hand over all public facing social media control to someone else who could sort of essentially buffer, I suppose, some of the criticism or ridicule that he would receive. Is that something that you think would also be true? And if you'd like to just give us a bit on if he wins, if he loses, do you see him staying in boxing? Do you see him going on the Misfits route? And similarly for Jake Paul as well, please.
Well, I'll start off with, it's not the first time I've been straight to the point on the SBR video, and it won't be the last. Tommy, if you watch this video, I do apologise, but if he loses, he's finished. He's done, dusted. Even the Misfits route, don't even pick a pair of gloves up again. I think if he goes the Misfits route, when your brother's Tyson, that's just baffling. I understand money-wise, but I feel like he should have started that route. If he was going to look at a boxing career and take them fights, I don't think he should have gone straight into pro ranks, fighting journeyman. You know, he's fought at Wembley Arena already. You know, I know it's early on the undercard, but he can still say he's fought at Wembley in front of however many people. If he loses, there's no coming back from it. He's talked it up too much. You know, he's dropped out of fights with Jake Paul previously, pulled out. You know, they claimed they had the evidence of the broken rib. I don't know what to make of it. We've got to believe as we see it. But if he wins, it's still a tough one. If he wins convincingly, so if he just pummels him for 8 rounds or just jabs and moves or knocks him out, then fair enough. I think he'll carry on into the pro ranks. But even when you look at what we've got, even the likes of, would he even reach the level of Hosea Burton, someone like that? I don't think so. Not based off what we've seen so far. But yeah, if he loses, it's the shame of having the Fury name and losing to Jake Paul and be too much to ever step through the ropes again.
And Jake Paul, I mean, it's a word Jake Paul to lose. Would you still be interested in seeing him fight the likes of Diaz? Is there still a market for Jake Paul if he loses this? And also, what do you think Jake Paul's involvement in boxing beyond this fight will be, necessarily win or lose?
I think it's a win-win for Jake Paul. There's no pressure on him. If he loses, he says, he can just say, I'm not actually a pro boxer. I've fought Tyson Fury's little brother. He's fought pro boxers. He's 8-0. So if he loses, there's no shame. If he wins, then he can actually say again, well, he might not be the best, but I've beat a professional boxer. So he could actually fight some bigger names. I don't know who, because he still calls out Canelo, which is obviously just all money talk. But if he beats Tommy Fury, whether he chooses not to or not, he could actually get some fights. Having an actual professional boxer on your record, it changes things for him. But if he loses, he just carries on fighting influencers, fighting ex-MMA fighters, even the bottom barrel level of boxers. You know, even like your Chavez Juniors, they still carry a name to an extent. So I think for Jake Paul, this is brilliant. It's win-win. He makes an absolute shit ton of money, and wins, and his stock goes even higher. I know it sounds weird to say, but he has got quite high stock in terms of like pay-per-view sales and whatnot. But if he loses, so be it. I don't think, regardless what happens, we still see Jake Paul in a boxing ring. To whatever extent that is, depends on whether he wins or loses. But yeah, from Jake Paul's position, it's win-win really.
No, I actually would agree with that. And I think it segues us nicely onto this next point, actually, which is Jake Paul's received, I suppose, a lot of vitriol really from the boxing community in a paradoxical way, in a sense, because on the one hand, people are abusing him and saying, it's not serious. On the other hand, people are calling him out for fights and chase some of that Jake Paul money. So, I mean, Danny, can I just get your thoughts, and then we'll come to you, Owen, as well on this. But just whether your overall views really on whether that criticism is fair or unfair, whether it's merited. Equally for someone who I suppose, you look at guys like Campbell Hatton, you look at guys even like Adam Azim, I suppose, is a young guy fighting, making his way, cutting up, making a name for himself. But frankly, fighting higher up on cards than you expect potentially, doing it in the public gaze. Do you think the criticism of Jake Paul is fair, Danny, or do you think it's undeserved? And where do you think it comes from, please?
I think you've seen a sort of shift slightly in terms of maybe more ex-fighters than current fighters. You're sort of maybe not praising Jake Paul, but certainly not as vehement in the criticism as they once were. I don't see where the criticism can come from. He's rightly or wrongly got that following. He's monetizing on it. He's built a personal brand. Fighters could do worse than to take a leaf out of his book in terms of getting attention and getting people caring about what to watch you. It's all well and good, having all the skills in the world, but there has to be a story, a narrative to sell to people, and nowhere near enough fighters do that. As I say, I do think there's been a slight shift. I think people can see he is dedicated to boxing. He does seem to train quite hard, and he has got a lot better. Which actually I think Tommy Fury could do worse than this, because I don't think by all accounts he does maybe take it as seriously. But he's not going to reach world level or obviously anything close to it. But I think people in the trade are starting to see that he's taking the sport seriously, and he probably has brought eyeballs to it. Now, how many of those eyeballs are going to sit and watch, regular Showtime and PBC cards? Probably not that many, but it's not as if the sport's covering itself in glory away from Jake Paul either. So people in glass houses and all that. But I think what criticism does remain is more just a reflection on the state of the sport, to be honest.
Oh, would you echo those sentiments from Danny? Have you felt a shift as well? Have you perceived the shift in kind of the way the commentary goes towards Jake Paul and his endeavours? And again, that criticism, where do you think it comes from? I do think it's merited.
Yeah, I do agree with Danny. I think, the criticism, I can understand and agree with some of it because, he's calling out the likes of people like Canelo, saying he's going to be a world champion and he's going to do this by this age and whatnot. And you need to be fighting actual boxers to be doing that. So I agree with it on that side of it. But then the flip side of the coin, I think some of it's harsh because realistically, if you're coming into the prime of your life, you've got all the money in the world, you can train like a boxer day in, day out for 4 years or so now. You're going to have fundamentals. You might not be a world champion, but you're going to be able to throw a combination. You might not be able to take a punch, but you're certainly going to be able to throw the basics. So he can box. Again, saying that very loosely, he can box to an extent. So I think some of the criticism is very harsh, but I think some of it's harsh as well because obviously, the KSI fight's a big fight in terms of money, but you look at the shows KSI's fighting on, he's fighting Swarms, a rapper that most people haven't even heard of. And you've got people like Astrid, Wet and Elbrook, like porn stars on the undercard. Whereas you've got Jake Paul who's fighting actual combat sport athletes, although they might be past it, and there is professionals fighting on the cards. So I think some of it is unnecessary criticism because he brings, I think Jake Paul does bring eyes to the sport, whereas you look at other influencers bring eyes to influencer boxing. Whether he fights big names in boxing or not, Jake Paul, he's calling them out and it's publicity. All PR is good PR. So I think some of it I agree with, some of it's fair, but I think some of it people just don't want to accept that this is boxing now. This is the world we live in. But if he's going to fight actual boxers, then I'll watch it. I'm here for it, but some of it's very unnecessary. But it's a tough one because you're always going to get the old school guys and girls that watch boxing who refuse to accept that someone who's famous off YouTube can step into a ring with actual professionals. So I think analysis of his ability is slightly over the top in terms of, I think people go to town on him, but he's going to have fundamentals. So Yes, it's a tough one, but I think some of it is very harsh personally. I'd say even myself, my opinion has been swayed slightly, um, as long as he carries on fighting actual names rather than influencers.
Thank you. And I'm actually what I'm going to do now, lads, is before because we've got a prediction time to come. That's where we're going to finish this. I'm just opening the floor to you two now, actually, to see whether you have any further questions or debate topics that you'd like to cover, or are you bravely moving towards predictions? So if you either have anything you want to say, please do so now.
I think one thing I was going to ask, we've sort of covered it, obviously, to both of you, but is it bang down the middle, 50-50 fight?
I don't think so. I think Tommy Fury is going to knock him out, to be honest.
I mean, this is heart versus head, Owen. Really. I mean, in my heart, Jake Paul wins this. In my head, Tommy Fury wins this. So, I actually expect to see a fight like what Danny described. I don't think it'll be a great spectacle, frankly, from a purely boxing viewing perspective. I think it will be quite messy, and there will come, especially from sort of rounds 5 and 6. I can see them both just holding onto each other and throwing occasional punches. So from that perspective, it's probably quite close, but I still expect Tommy Fury to win. So I'd probably have it somewhere like 60-40, 65-35, somewhere like that.
Who's the favourite with the bookies at the minute? Is it Jake Paul?
It is.
Madness. Absolute madness. Absolute madness.
Danny, do you have anything else you want to raise, or should we move? Should we move to predictions at this time?
God, I'm raking my brain here. Is Big John allowed in Saudi Arabia? Do we know?
If anyone knows whether Big John's allowed in Saudi Arabia, leave that in the comments. Big John, if you're watching this, please leave it in the comments. Big John Fisher, if you're watching this, put the Chinese down and please leave it in the comments. Right.
Do you think he would behave himself though? Do you think there would be the same antics? Because like I seen, right, the first press conference for it, they were sat and there was this like sheikh or something sat in all the gear, and like surely that shambles can't be allowed to go on where he's like squaring up the TVs instead of like doing.
I think if John starts talking about dogs, then things have taken a very low note, frankly. I think that a sheikh needs to get hold of this and just say, no, there's certain purity laws that we have to obey. So I actually don't think, now that it's happening, I think that will be curbed a little, frankly. I'd expect that to be curved. And there's also no real need for it now. Like we know what's coming from John.
There's need for it. There is need for it. Get it going.
All right, lads, we move to predictions. So I've given a one as well, but I'd like you to also give your predictions. But if you like, you can also give a heart versus heart and head as well, and say who you'd like to win, but who you think will win. Were those to be different? And Owen, I'm going to come to you first, please.
Based off a boxing purist point of view, I think I've said it. I've argued with people for ages since Tommy Fury's been pro. I think Fury smashes him from corner to corner. I think Jake Paul's never actually been punched. Surprisingly, I don't know if you've seen on Twitter, and if anyone watching seen on Twitter, but Lyndon Arthur said, although it was in sparring, he hasn't been hit as hard as Tommy Fury hit him. He said he hits you in weird ways that it doesn't necessarily stop you, but it's like, right, that hurt. So it is clear, I think, even based off that, from the level of opponents Fury will have sparred as well, I think he should be levels and levels above Jake Paul. I've said it all along, I think he smashes him from post to post. And yeah, I think he knocks him out. Bit of a shameless plug, but obviously interviewed Aaron Bowen recently, just gone out. But when Aaron was in the amateurs, he fought at super middle or light heavy. I said if Jake Paul and Aaron had met at light heavy whilst Aaron was an amateur, even then I said Aaron Bowen would have absolutely smashed him about the ring. And the elite level of even British amateurs would absolutely pulverise Jake Paul in a boxing ring. Obviously, Fury hasn't had that level of amateur experience, but just a basis to look at. I think Fury smashes him up and stops him late.
And from a heart perspective, would you like to see Fury win, or would you prefer to see Jake Paul win?
From a heart perspective, is it possible for them both to get knocked out? I mean, it's a tough one. I think, again, because obviously I love the sport, for me, for my heart, Fury has to win for me. It's not an option that Jake Paul can actually be a professional boxer. If he does, hat off to him, fair play. And this is definitely a prediction I don't want to get wrong, but I just need Tommy Fury to win just for the purism of the sport. Tommy Fury has to win, but I do think he does. I think he'll be a bit cagey, but as soon as he did say it himself, and he ain't the best trash talker, but as soon as he cracks Jake Paul on the chin, I think Jake Paul will fold.
Danny, heart and head. You've already said you expect Fury to win. Does your heart match the head? And KO, you sticking by that?
I couldn't give a fuck who wins this, lad, honestly. Like, I'm interested in like proper boxing matches with meaning and working towards title, establishing the best in the country, the best in the division. This has nothing to do with that. And look, I'm looking forward to watching it for the shambles, but like no outcome here do I care about. As I said, I think Tommy Fury will stop him. I think the first 2 or 3 rounds, because I don't think Tommy Fury's technically that great, I think he'll struggle to land initially, be a lot of clinching, but I don't think Jake Paul will be able to take it and hit, as Owen says. The only time he's been caught proper clean was by Woodley, fell back into the ropes, hadn't a clue what to do, and then Woodley just let him off the hook, where Tommy Fury will just throw everything at him, and even though it won't be like the most educated work, probably smother a lot of his own work, I think he'll stop him. I don't think Jake Paul will be able to take it and hit like that, to be honest.
Thanks for that, Danny. Well, there could be egg on your face if in 5 years' time Paul versus Bivol is for the unified light heavy championship of the world, mate. But we'll clip that and play it back to you if that does become the case. Thank you guys, obviously, for watching. Obviously, if, like as we say on all these videos, if you agree with what we're saying, give it a thumbs up. If you think we're talking rubbish, please let us know that as well in the comments. We're now off, I think, the 3 of us to enjoy a ice cold can of Prime, and then we will be setting into other content we've got coming up. But thank you very much, guys, for watching. Owen and Danny, thank you very much for joining me.
Cheers, boys.
As always, mate.